Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome back to 3 Buck Theater and welcome to my Real Board series. This is not patio commentary where I talk about the production history of movies. This is a series all about how movies make me feel. Specifically, in this particular case, The Mummy from 1999. This 22-year-old action-adventure film is still, in my opinion, one of the greatest pieces of pop culture and action-adventure cinema ever made. And it's one that I think back on here now over 2 decades later very fondly, probably even more fondly than I did when it first came out in the big kicked off the summer, I think in 1999. I remember going to see it at my local cinema with my friend, not thinking that it was going to be that good. Granted, look, I had grown up watching Brendan Fraser movies predominantly when he teamed up with Pauly Shore. That's how I pretty much knew him at the time, although before this one, he had done George of the Jungle, which was, I think, mostly known, at least in my social circle back then, as being the one that featured the song, from Shaggy, Mr. Boombastic. That was a big thing back in the 90s. We were all really dumb when it came to liking music, although I still do like Shaggy, but that particular track is, it's still better than It Wasn't Me. However, this was his kind of big break into cinema. This was kind of his big break into being a leading action star. And it's one that unfortunately didn't carry on forever. And I feel like he got heavily screwed out of a lot of this. But the movie was written and directed by a man by the name of Stephen Sommers, who at the time, the movie he had just had right before then was a movie called Deep Rising, which was a Treat Williams movie about, I think it was like a heist on a cruise ship, right? It had Treat Williams and Famke Jensen and Anthony Held. And it was, it came out in 1998, and it came out right before Deep Impact, which is what I actually thought it was at first. I'm not going to lie. I thought that when I heard Stephen Sommers, and I was a teenager, I heard Stephen Sommers and I heard, oh, he did the Deep Rising. In my mind, I thought Deep Impact because I liked Deep Impact because I had a crush on Lily Sobieski when I was a teenager. And that was also right around the same time as Armageddon when they had the dueling films on that front. So when I looked at so I got it wrong. I thought to myself, oh, this guy is absolutely positively just doing deep, he did Deep Impact. So obviously The Mummy is going to be something that's going to be different than just your standard summer blockbuster schlock, right? Well, it turns out that that's absolutely positively wrong. I was absolutely wrong on that one. However, I don't care, because The Mummy itself is a movie that has absolutely withstood the test of time, 100%. And it's one that you can go back and watch and you get the vibe of Indiana Jones. Like, as far as these kind of action adventure films go that are almost like period pieces, this is set before any of the Indiana Jones movies, but it very much felt like Stephen Sommers was pulling from the Steven Spielberg catalog. And it just worked out well because, here's the thing. Harrison Ford is a charming, dashing rogue. And you know what? Brendan Fraser can pull it off too, with just slightly better comedic chops. The I guess you could say the aesthetic and the love of Fraser's performance in this movie is really what propelled it to being a classic. And I don't want to call it a cult classic. I think it really is, in fact, very much an actual classic of a movie. And this is a remake to a 1932 film of the exact same name. And obviously, this is something Universal has done. We know, 2017 with the Mummy reboot with Tom Cruise, that they were trying to build up their Dark Universe franchise. This was before all of that. This was just them giving a movie to Stephen Sommers and saying, hey, go off and make this movie and hope it will do well. And I don't even know all the production history yet. I'll have to do a patio commentary on it and just dive into it. But for me, I remember going to see this movie. And I remember seeing the trailers in the months leading up to it. And I remember going, this should be fun. This should be an entertaining ride. This should be one that I think is going to, it's going to be a fun way to kill an afternoon. But what I didn't expect, and what I still to this day absolutely love, was how it all clicked. The chemistry between Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, the fact that, they told a really interesting story about, what is it, about the mummy, and the Noxuna Moon, and then they had Benny's character was great, like him being the comic relief, but also just like the skeevy kind of slime ball character you would find in, like a, I don't know, like a Disney movie. It felt like a live action Disney movie with the characterizations that they had here. It very much fell into those tropes for me. But the action was spectacular. The comedy was great, and the beats were all there. And when you watch it, you want to go on this adventure with these people, right? You want to go on an adventure to the middle of the desert to try to find this tomb and everything else. And it just worked out really, really, really well for me as a fan, because as the movie progresses, you start to see, Fraser and Weisz's chemistry growing, and you see the relationship bonding. And then, when like it gets to the part when they're in the city and he grabs, the mummy grabs Rachel Weisz, and then Brendan Fraser's like, I'll be seeing you soon. And like, he says it with such determination that you're like, hell yeah, dude, hell yeah. Like, your nips get a little bit hard thinking about that. Cause you're like, yeah, man, I could, you put yourself exactly in his shoes in that moment in time. And, and also Arnold Vosloo did a great job as Imhotep, not only in this movie, but even in its sequel, which I do think gets kind of like attacked more than it should. It definitely wasn't as good or as strong as this movie. But when you watch these franchises, when you watch these movies, you really want to see more from these characters, and I like that. So anyway, the movie only had an $80 million budget, and it ended up pulling in over $416 million worldwide. And that, of course, not only kicked off The Mummy Returns, but eventually The Mummy, The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, which was not very good. And then also the Scorpion King franchise, which is what gave us ultimately Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as an entertainer / actor. I'm not calling him a movie star. I'm sorry. I have an argument on that. But really, the franchise, its roots to me are really what I think paved the way for a lot of that type of swashbuckling action adventure films that we saw right around that time. And those kind of films have never really gone away. Those kind of films have never really crashed and burned and died, and we've always gotten them in one form or another. But when you watch the way that Stephen Sommers crafted this tale, how he pulled from the old movies, pulled from the old legends, and he made it fun and swashbuckling and very much high Indiana Jones-esque adventure. And the reason why I say that is because the concept, the core impetus of Indiana Jones's character has everything to do with a guy getting in over his head and then figuring out a way to get away from it, to get out of it. And that's essentially what Brendan Fraser's Rick is doing in this movie. He finds himself, when we first meet him, he's going to be hung. So he's in over his head. He finds a way to get himself out of it. They go and they, take off and they fight all these bad guys. He finds himself, he gets away out of it. He does all of these things time and time and time again, because that, of course, is just his character journey. And along the way, he falls in love with Evelyn, and she falls in love with him, and they have great little moments here and there. And then also we get, Jonathan, and I love Jonathan because I always felt that he ended up doing a great job. Jonathan Hyde is the actor. I always thought he did a really good job in that role of like the very kind of greedy brother who is not lazy, but is definitely not as good as his sister, and he recognizes that fact. And there's a great line when they're talking, I forget if it's in this movie or if it's in the sequel, where they're talking to Ode Fair, and he goes like, "It is written," and Jonathan just goes, "Where's all this stuff written?" It might be in the sequel. I might be thinking of The Mummy Returns, which I do need to watch again, because I just recently checked out this one again, and I still really like it. You got the bit with the scarab beetles. I thought that was a lot of fun. Those are definitely freaky. That imagery of them going into that one guide's, in his shoe and then up through his body, and then you see it go in his head, and then it just eats his brain and he dies, is crazy. Or no, he goes crazy, then he runs into the wall and he smacks his head and he dies. It's just like, that was freaky for back then. So yeah, I was a teenager when that movie came out. I was 17 when that film came out. And I think, like, while it wasn't scary, it was definitely thrilling. It was definitely fun. And it's one that, it was able to kind of pull from the earlier elements of what The Mummy was, but it did it in a way that wasn't over the top scary. It was just a little bit like, ooh, but it kept you engaged. It kept you involved, and it kept you really, really, really wanting more. And especially once Imhotep was able to kind of regain his powers as he went through one by one, and he was taking out the Americans, and he was who had taken the jars and taking their eyes and their tongues and everything else, and regaining his strength in order to bring the locusts and then to bring the sandstorm, all in the process of trying to resurrect the Noxuna moon. It was just like you can see his motivation as a villain was actually really good. The whole point of it is that it absolutely was a love story, and it worked on both fronts because we got to see that whole thing play out, because we know that he's going through this process of killing everybody and destroying everything so he can resurrect his one true love, and then he finally gets her. But then in his own greed, in his own attempt to control things, he ends up losing her. Now, I mean, granted, they brought her back for the sequel. You know, I mean, that is what it is. I never really minded it, but again, it's one of those things where it's like there were some tropes that the sequels pulled from that they maybe shouldn't have. But this movie, I think, has like kind of stood the test of time now, over 2 decades old, of being something that is almost relatively perfect as one can be for the type of content, the type of movie, the type of property that it was trying to be at that time. It is reminiscent of the 90s. It is very much a product of its time. But the reason why I think it's able to kind of live on is because you can't ever beat that type of charisma. You know what I mean? Is like, and that's one of the reasons why I call like someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson more of an entertainer, because he has that charisma that can carry on. Brendan Fraser has that charisma that can carry on. And this movie and its sequels, I think there's moments in the second and third that do very well for him. And it's unfortunate what happened to his career with his ex-wife, but at least now he's back on Doom Patrol and he's doing some other things, and he's got a lot of fan love. So to me, that's pretty great. Unfortunately, though, Stephen Sommers' career hasn't necessarily like done much. He hasn't directed a movie since 2013's Odd Thomas, which is unfortunate. And you know, I'm hoping he comes back and he gets to do something, because I love Van Helsing. I love The Mummy Returns. You know, and I'd love to see him come back and really kind of nail this kind of over the top pulpy storytelling again. And I hope one day he's able to, because it's always a shame the way Hollywood operates when you have someone who has talent and is able to put together very competent and cohesive stories that do speak to a larger audience in regards to the general audience who likes the kind of summer blockbuster popcorn flair, but then has, you know, a couple that maybe don't do as great and they just get forgotten. Well, this longtime Mummy fan is never going to forget Stephen Sommers, is never going to forget his impact on pop culture back in the day, as well as his choosing of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to play the Scorpion King, to give us that character, to kind of bring him into the limelight. So I would love it if he would be able to find a way to come back and give us maybe another Mummy movie down the road. You know what? I know that's a long shot. I know Rob Marshall tried to do the Mummy 3, or Rob Cohen. Sorry, not Rob Marshall, Rob Cohen. And he wasn't, it should have been Stephen Sommers, but unfortunately, we're just not seeing him much anymore. But that's just my thoughts on this movie. These are just things I wanted to talk about. I just kind of want to have a very kind of loose discussion about The Mummy, why I love it. And let me know your favorite thoughts about this movie. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Is there any other movie you just want me to kind of like have a stream of consciousness to ramble on? And if you guys do want to catch more, I do go live most nights here on the channel. You can check out the live streams. Like last night, we talked about Batman and his inability to go down on Catwoman, at least according to DC. So it's good times. It's fun stuff. Anyway, I'll talk to you all later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you again for listening, and peace out.